We just came out of Taurus season, which if you watch that video, you know that despite all of its beauty and its flowers and its sensory richness, was actually one of the more historically loaded Taurus seasons in recent memory. Uranus changing signs for the first time in 8 years, a Scorpio full moon, a Mars-Saturn collision, a new moon that had just been turned over by Pluto retrograde. Taurus season 2026 asked you to really root down, to figure out what you were building, to really get in your body before the world sped up. But now the world is speeding up. The sun enters Gemini, and within 24 hours, it conjuncts Uranus. Okay, let me say that again. Within 1 day of Gemini season beginning, the sun makes contact with the most disruptive, revolutionary, electrically charged planet in our solar system, freshly installed in Gemini after 84 years of its absence. So this is not a quiet season opening. This is the season opening kind of in the middle of a sentence. So welcome to Gemini season 2026. Keep up if you can. Before we get into the transits, as always, I want to spend some time on the sign itself, on Gemini itself, because truly, it is one of the most misunderstood signs in the entire zodiac, and I think that that misunderstanding will really cost you your ability to navigate Gemini transits well, Gemini season well. We know that Gemini has a lot of nasty things said about itself. We know that there's a lot of Gemini propaganda out there, and from the years of 2019 to 2021, a lot of that propaganda was probably coming from me. But I will say that was because I didn't understand Gemini. I would say that it was because I was confused by Gemini, by the Gemini men in my life that drove me absolutely crazy. If you read my Substack article, the first one that I ever published, I explained why I got into astrology, and the main reason why was because a Gemini man was truly terrorizing me and I just couldn't figure him out. So I kind of turned to astrology, and that's how this whole thing started. But anyway, the reputation of Gemini is two-faced, right? Flaky, scattered, can't commit, talks too much, knows a little bit about everything and a lot about nothing, right? You've heard all of it. And some of it is accurate, but I think it's a surface reading that misses really what Gemini is actually doing and why. Gemini is a mutable air sign. Mutable means that it is in the transitional mode. It's the sign that closes the season and prepares the ground for what comes next. Mutable signs are going to be the ones that really specialize in distributing, in dispersing, and moving energy outward rather than holding it in. They are not meant to be still. They are the messengers. They are the bridges. They are the connective tissue between one state of being and the next. And air means that it operates through the mind, through communication, through the exchange of information, through ideas between people. And Gemini specifically, it is the first air sign in the entire zodiac. We have Gemini first, Libra second, and then Aquarius third. And so since Gemini is the first, it means that its air is the most local, the most immediate, the most personal, right? Gemini is the conversation that you're having right now. It's the text that you just sent. It's the thought that you just had, and you immediately had to go tell somebody about it. Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury is the planet of the mind, of communication, of commerce, of trickery, of translation. In mythology, Mercury is Hermes, the only god that can move freely between all of the realms, right? The world of the living and the world of the dead, Olympus and the earth, the divine and the mortal. Hermes was the messenger, the thief, the inventor, the guide of souls, and he never was still. He moves between things. He carries meaning from one place to another, but he also doesn't stay in any of these places long enough to be changed by them. And that is the Gemini function, right? To carry, to translate, to connect, to move. The twin symbol is the one that generates, I think, the most confusion and the most unfair reputation. I find the twins to be so interesting, especially when we think about its mythology, which I'm going to talk about in 3, 2, 1 seconds. So Castor and Pollux in Greek mythology, one was mortal, one was divine. They were inseparable despite being opposites. And when Castor died, Pollux grieved so much that Zeus transformed them both into the constellation so that they could remain together, right? Alternating, between the heavens and the underworld forever, for eternity. The twins are not about duplicity. They are about the capacity to hold two things simultaneously, two perspectives, two truths, two versions of yourself that maybe seem contradictory but are both real. And I think that Gemini is the sign that understands more than any other sign that reality is not singular, that you can be two things at once, that the most honest answer to many questions is both. And in Hellenistic astrology, Gemini is a bicorporeal sign, meaning that it is literally two-bodied. And bicorporeal is a very technical term, but it carries a lot of meaning because Gemini is the sign that encompasses more than one nature, more than one mode of being, right? It's not split. That is what I'm trying to get at here. People think that Gemini in the twins means split. It means that there's a fracture. It might mean that Gemini is broken, right? I think broken is a word that gets thrown a lot around with people who have Gemini placements. But the way to really reframe that is that it's multiple, right? There is a difference. Split, I think, implies fracture, implies damage, irresolution. Multiple implies range, adaptability, the ability to really move between registers without losing yourself in the transition. And so at its best, Gemini is the most versatile intelligence in the entire zodiac, 100%. At its worst, it is so comfortable moving between things that it never really commits to any of them long enough to build something that kind of could be important or that stands the test of time. But I think that Gemini season every year is the season of information, of ideas, of quick connections, of the serendipitous conversations that happen, the books that you pick up at random and then you find the exact sentence that you needed at that exact moment. It is the season where your mind is the most alive, the most curious, the most willing to be changed by what it encounters. It is also the season where your mind is the most scattered and the most overstimulated and the most susceptible to the anxiety of too many things happening all at once. And I think that the difference between those two experiences that you can have during Gemini season is usually attention, right? What you choose to focus on versus what you let flow past you. And I think Gemini season really rewards curation as much as it does curiosity. This year, with Uranus freshly in Gemini and the sun hitting it immediately on entry, Gemini season 2026 is kind of running at a frequency that I don't think we have really experienced in our lifetime, right? This is not a normal season of light mental activity and social spontaneity. I think that this year during Gemini season, something happens in the way that we think, in the way that we communicate, in the way that we relate to information. And we're going to start to really understand what the Uranus and Gemini era is actually going to start looking like in practice, right? Taurus season was the last exhale. And I think Gemini season is this kind of breath, the new breath of the new world, something like that. So the sun enters Gemini, and then it conjuncts Uranus in Gemini less than 38 hours later. That is an almost immediate collision between the two, so I'm going to treat them as one event because they are effectively one event in my brain, and I think it would be more helpful that way. So the sun is our consciousness, our sense of self, our vitality, our direction, the way that we move through the world, and Uranus is disruption, liberation, the unexpected event that changes everything, the realization that changes everything. And when these two meet at the very entrance of a sign where Uranus has just taken up a 7-year residence, the conjunction is not just like an aspect in a transit calendar, it's a announcement. It's saying, I'm here. Think about what a Sun-Uranus conjunction actually is. The sun illuminates whatever it touches. So when the sun touches Uranus, it illuminates the Uranian frequency, the Uranian energy and vibe. It illuminates the bolt that comes out of the blue, the idea that you didn't see coming, the information that makes you look at something completely differently. It also activates Uranus outwardly in the world, which means that the days around this conjunction have a quality of unexpected events, new developments, things breaking open that had been sealed. And not all of it in a disruptive, painful sense. Uranus disruptions are often very liberating, but comfortable, definitely not, right? They are never comfortable. They are always clarifying. The sun also conjuncts Uranus at the same time as Mercury, as Gemini's ruler, is the first major planet to have already seeded something around how we communicate and how we connect because it had just been in Gemini. So new forms of communication, new ways of information that moves, new ideas about what's possible in that realm. And so by the time the sun adds its illumination a few days later after Mercury in Gemini's ingress, those seeds, they're planted in the light. What was planted is now visible. On the mundane level, watch for huge developments in tech, in AI specifically, right? Uranus in Gemini's primary domain is communication technology, is social media, is information systems, and the things through which language and knowledge move. And the sun conjuncting it in the first week of its new sign is an activation of that domain. Something might break open in the news cycle around May 22nd-ish that has the quality of a preview of the next 7 years of Uranus being in Gemini. Maybe a development in AI that shifts the conversation, maybe a communications related political event that couldn't have been predicted, right? Maybe something in the media that changes the shape of everything. It'll probably be more obvious in retrospect than it is right now, but there are things happening right now that we probably don't know about. On the personal level, wherever 0 to 2 degrees of Gemini falls in your chart, this conjunction is waking something up. It is the Uranian Gemini alarm clock going off in that specific house of your life and what it rules for you. And I think that the sun being present there as well means that the awakening happens with full conscious awareness, right? You're not going to miss it. You are definitely going to feel it as a jolt of clarity, as a new desire to do something differently, as a restlessness in a specific domain of your life that maybe has been building and it's now really undeniably active. I think my advice for the opening of Gemini season 2026, given this conjunction, is to stay loose, right? Stay curious. Don't make any rigid plans for the first week and then be surprised when they definitely change. Uranus at the entrance of the season, it means that this season kind of begins with the gear that you weren't expecting, right? The people who will navigate this well are going to be the ones who hold their plans as provisional and their minds as open, who treat the disruption as information rather than a catastrophe, who ask, what is this showing me, rather than like, why is this happening to me? 10 days into Gemini season and we get a full moon, and not just any full moon, but a blue moon. This is the second full moon of May, which makes it very astrologically significant in the way that second events in a sequence always just carry a little bit more weight than the first. We already had the Scorpio full moon on May 1st, which was the deep, dark, underground illumination, something surfacing from the basement. And now the Sagittarius full moon is what you do with what you found there in the basement. The blue moon in Sag lays the cards on the table, all the cards on the table, and it kind of just brings everything together. I love Sagittarius as a sign. And actually, speaking of Sagittarius, let me explain the Gemini Sagittarius axis first, because it's one of the most interesting polarities in the entire zodiac to me. And this is a Sag full moon happening during Gemini season, which is how full moons work, yes, but it's interesting nonetheless. Gemini rules the lower mind, the local, the immediate, the curious, the data gathering function of intelligence. It is interested in everything and committed to no single truth. It collects. Sagittarius rules the higher mind, the broad, the philosophical, the truth-seeking function of intelligence that takes all of Gemini's collected data and then it asks what it means. You know, where Gemini is the journalist, Sag is the philosopher. Where Gemini wants the facts, Sag wants the meaning behind the facts. And I think that they both need each other desperately, right? Facts without meaning is just noise, and meaning without facts is just, what, dogma? And so a full moon on this axis during Gemini season is really the sky, the cosmos, whoever, asking you to integrate both, right? You've been in the information phase. Gemini season has been feeding you data, so new conversations, new perspectives, new things that you didn't know a week ago. And the Sag full moon is the moment to really lift your head from the data stream and ask, okay, but what does this actually all mean, right? What are the patterns? What is the truth underneath the information? What do I actually believe, right? If the same conversation, desire, resentment, fear, doubts keep returning to you this month, the point is to stop reflecting and really get to the why of it all. There's an interesting, I think, sort of emotional pressure here that is less about staying calm and more about telling the truth to yourself, being real with yourself. You know, it's more about telling the truth without turning that truth into some sort of escape plan. And that is worth sitting with, because Sagittarius is this sign that can use the pursuit of truth as a form of avoidance, right? The endless questions and the philosophical inquiry that never really comes to a head or commitment, right? The belief that the horizon is always more interesting than the place that you're actually standing at right now. And I think that a blue moon in Sag has kind of run out of patience for that particular flavor of evasion. This is 100% a full moon that wants the truth and wants it now, right? This is a very confrontational one. The archer doesn't miss on purpose to spare people's feelings. The arrow, it either flies true and hits directly on the mark or doesn't fly at all. For you personally, pull up your Sag house, right? Whatever life area that lives there, it's having this theme revealed. And I think the question being asked is, what do you actually believe about this theme, right? Not what you've been saying, not what you've been doing, but what you actually believe. I think the blue moon asks for a lot of honesty in this domain of meaning and philosophy and truth, and specifically about whether what you've been telling yourself about your life is actually true, or whether it is a comfortable narrative that is kind of expired. The day after the blue moon, Mercury moves from Gemini into Cancer, and I think the timing here is really good, right? You've just had your Sagittarius full moon revelation, right? This moment of confrontational truth-telling. You're, okay, here's what I actually believe. And then Mercury, the mind, moves into Cancer, and I think the quality of your thinking really changes in a positive way to kind of piggyback off of the full moon. Mercury in Cancer is not an intellectual placement. It is a very emotional one. The mind in Cancer thinks in feelings, in memories, in the specific sensory texture of personal experiences. It doesn't reason its way to conclusion. It feels its way to them. And I think logic for Mercury in Cancer is a lot less convincing than a gut feeling that won't go away, or a dream that you keep having that seems to mean something. It is intuitive intelligence rather than analytical intelligence. And I think it's still real intelligence even when it's super hard to explain to anybody. After the speed and electrical charge of Gemini season's first 10 days, Mercury in Cancer is a huge gear shift, right? Your mind goes from being wide and fast and gathering to narrow and deep and really processing, right? This is a transit for working through the Sag full moon, right? For sitting with what you discovered rather than immediately turning it into something. I think Mercury in Cancer is a mind that journals, right? A mind that calls its mother, that cries in the car with the music on, that understands something not by thinking about it, but by feeling it enough times that the understanding really starts to settle into your body. Practically, I think the first week of June is going to feel quieter mentally than the previous 2 weeks. And I think that's appropriate, right? You've been processing a lot. Give Mercury in Cancer the time that it needs to make meaning from the inside out rather than the outside in. I think the articulation will come. And I think that the Cancer placement really just asks that the feelings precede the words. It asks that the feelings precedes the words rather than the words arriving before you've really had the chance to feel anything. Now, I want to give this aspect the space that it deserves because it is generally one of the most beautiful transits of 2026. And I think that it can get lost in the noise of a very loud astrological year. On June 9th, Venus and Jupiter conjoin at 25 degrees of Cancer. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater benefic. They are meeting in Cancer, which is Jupiter's exaltation, the sign where Jupiter functions at its absolute best. This is the two benefics, the two planets most associated with genuine good fortune and abundance and the things that make life worth living, meeting in one of the most emotionally generous signs in the entire zodiac, in the territory of home and nourishment and the people that you love the most. A conjunction between the two benefics is one of the most auspicious aspects possible. You know, it doesn't guarantee anything necessarily, but benefics meeting each other still require the person to be present to receive what's being offered to them. And I think that offer is really real considering this kind of energy. You know, the sky is genuinely generous on this date in a way that's not always common. You know, this isn't a dramatic transit, it's not a crisis, it's not a breakthrough, but it is the arrival of something good, of something that has been building across Jupiter's entire stay in Cancer, and that really reaches its peak expression in this final conjunction before Jupiter leaves the sign 3-ish weeks later. And at 25 degrees of Cancer, this conjunction is happening in the late mature degrees of the sign. You know, this is not the fresh, excited energy of an early Cancer placement. This is the depth of it. It's the love that has been tended to over time, the home that has been built slowly, the relationship that is now something stable and nourishing because it was treated really carefully. And I think that Venus and Jupiter meeting here is the reward for the work of Jupiter in Cancer, right? Jupiter in Cancer has been this year of a lot of emotional investment. It's been this year of building the more private parts of your world, of your emotions. And I think it's the payoff that really arrives in the late degree of the sign, just before everything moves on into Leo. I also want to say something about the timing in context of the whole entire season, right? We are 3 weeks from Jupiter moving into Leo, the cultural shift from Cancer to Leo that I will talk about in my upcoming essay on Substack. Jupiter and Leo, what that can definitely bring, and I'll also talk about it in the next video. But Venus conjunct Jupiter at 25 degrees of Cancer, it's this final flourish of the Cancer chapter, right? It's the last evening of a dinner party that has been going on for 13 months. The food is still on the table, the candles are still lit, the conversations are still good, so take it in, right? There's this specific quality of warmth and intimacy and domestic abundance that is about to become rarer, not gone, but rarer, right? Let June 9th-ish in that time be a time to live in that fully without any sort of distractions before everything kind of starts to change. It's one of the better dates of the year for anything in the domain of love, home, creative projects, financial decisions made from a place of genuine abundance rather than anxiety, and just anything that requires the goodwill of the people closest to you, right? If you have been waiting for a good moment to have a loving conversation or to receive care graciously, to celebrate something with the people who matter to you, I would say June 9th is definitely the day. The days surrounding June 9th are also really good days. 4 days after the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, Venus leaves Cancer and enters Leo. This is the first of the Leo placements that will really define the second half of 2026. I'm so excited for this. Venus in Leo is maximalist. She is the placement that wears that statement piece, that falls in love loudly and without apology, that creates for the pleasure of being seen and creating. And where Venus in Cancer wanted to nourish, Venus in Leo wants to dazzle. That's the word that always comes to my mind when I think of Venus in Leo. And you know, this is not a worse version of Venus. It's just a different register. It's this desire to be admired, to be witnessed in your beauty and in your creativity and in the specific way that you love. And it's a really real and legitimate desire that I think people like to call shallow. But Leo does not apologize for wanting to be seen. It considers visibility a form of love given and received. And so practically the next few weeks of Venus and Leo are excellent for creative projects, for romance, for dressing in a way that expresses something genuine about who you are rather than doing something safe, for gift giving. It's just not a transit to be modest about your gifts, literally like physical gifts, but also your own innate gifts. I think that Venus and Leo really rewards the people who show up fully and make no apology for it. Just be who you are. Also, what I want to say about Venus entering Leo, specifically in the context of Gemini season 2026, is that this ingress is a preview of Jupiter in Leo arriving 2 weeks later, right? Venus is kind of setting the stage. She walks into Leo first, she begins to warm the room, and then by the time that Jupiter arrives at the end of June, Venus has already been there for 2 weeks, kind of establishing the flavor of Leo abundance. These two planets together in Leo in the final week of June and into July is the beginning of something that is going to feel significantly louder and more expressive and more publicly oriented than anything that we have seen in the last 13 months. I am so excited to talk about Jupiter in Leo, but for now, Venus enters first, she makes the introduction, and then Jupiter walks to the door that she opened and starts to give a lot more to us. Now, new moon in Gemini, 24 degrees, June 15th, near the end of the sign. One of the more interesting lunations to plan intentions in because of where we are in the season, right? 24 degrees of Gemini is late sign territory. This is a Gemini that's been around the block, that has gathered a lot of information, has had a lot of conversations, that has made a lot of connections. And the new moon here is not the fresh start energy of 0 degrees or 1 degrees. It is the beginning that comes after considerable experience. So the seeds that are planted at this new moon have kind of been thought through. It has been revised a little bit. It really incorporates what you learned from the blue moon 2 weeks ago, what the Venus-Jupiter conjunction offered, what Mercury in Cancer has kind of been processing in the background. It took a lot of the data and it's learning from it. And I think the more important question is, what does it mean to set intentions for a Gemini new moon? It means, what do you want to learn? What conversation do you want to begin or deepen? What information do you want to pursue? What do you want to say that you haven't said yet? I think Gemini new moons are not for planting seeds of material things. They are for planting seeds of ideas, of communication, connection, the specific intellectual and relational threads you want to follow over the next 6 months. Of everything that you have been gathering and processing this Gemini season, what are you actually going to do with it, right? What conversations are you going to follow all the way through instead of leaving it half finished, right? What do you actually want to learn? Not what seems interesting right now, but what will still matter in November and in December. This new moon in Gemini 6 months from now, it's going to become the full moon in Gemini in December 2026. So whatever seeds you are intellectually or communicatively planning right now, June 15th, is going to actually reach its peak and reach its culmination at the end of the year. I'm using my hands a lot. That's very Gemini of me right now. Okay, funny how the thing that I'm most excited to talk about in this video and in what is happening Gemini season happens literally at the end of Gemini season. It's the last thing that I talk about. 4 days before the summer solstice, before Cancer season starts, Chiron leaves Aries and it enters Taurus. This is a shift that has been building for years. It will be felt for decades. It hasn't been in this sign since the late 1970s, so pretty important, I think. Where do I want to start? Let me tell you what Chiron is before I tell you what it means. Chiron is a centaur body, a minor planet, a planetoid that orbits between Saturn and Uranus. In astrology, it's the wounded healer. In mythology, Chiron was a centaur, half man, half horse, wisest and most civilized of his kind, teacher of iconic heroes like Achilles, like Jason. And the way the story goes, he was accidentally wounded by one of Hercules' arrows, a wound that would never heal because the arrow was poisoned with hydro blood. And Chiron did not die. He lived on in permanent pain, using that wound as the source of his wisdom as a healer. He became the greatest healer in the ancient world precisely because he couldn't heal himself. His wound was not an obstacle to his gift. It was actually the origin to his gift as a healer. And so representing that, in astrology, wherever Chiron is in the sky or in your own chart is where there's a wound that won't fully close, won't fully heal, but where there is so much potential for wisdom, for healing, for yourself and for other people. The wound and the gift are pretty much inseparable in Chiron's mythology and in Chiron's astrology, right? Like you kind of can't have one without the other. Now, Chiron has been in Aries since 2018, so 8 years of this collective wound around Aries themes. What is the biggest Aries theme? Identity. Collective wound around identity, around your body, around your body as this first site of wounding. And so the question Chiron in Aries has been asking for nearly a decade is, who are you when you are wounded at the level of who you are, of yourself? What happens to your sense of identity when it is challenged? What happens to your sense of identity when it is taken away? And so the generation that came of age during Chiron and Aries, the ones who were teenagers or young adults from 2018 to 2026, are the generation most defined by the wound of selfhood. The pandemic that took away the social context through which identity is formed, right? The political environment that made self-definition an act with real consequences. The social media landscape that simultaneously demanded constant self-presentation and made that self-presentation a site of constant judgment. So Chiron in Aries was the wound of who am I, as all Aries transits are, but it kind of asked that at max volume for nearly a decade. Now Chiron moves into Taurus and the wound shifts from identity to worth. Chiron in Taurus activates healing around worth, around security, around material abundance, right? The specific area of your life most affected depends on where Taurus falls in your own birth chart, but the collective wound that Chiron in Taurus is going to excavate over the next 7 years is the wound of enoughness. Am I enough? Do I have enough? Is what I have built enough? Is my body enough? Is my bank account enough? Is my output enough? Do I deserve what I have? Do I deserve more, right? This is the wound that lives underneath everything, underneath the protein maxing trends, underneath the financial anxiety that Uranus and Taurus spent 8 years agitating, underneath the relationship between worth and productivity that late capitalism has made so psychologically toxic that most people can't separate the phrase like I'm tired from I am failing. I think Chiron and Taurus really exposes collective wounds around scarcity, around survival fears, around the belief that we're not enough. And so this transit asks, what would you change if you truly believed you deserved abundance? And I want to be specific about what this transit means in 2026 specifically because the context matters, right? Like we have just spent 8 years with Uranus and Taurus destabilizing our material relationship to security. So financial systems reorganized, the nature of work remade, what it means to own something complicated by crypto and inflation and economy and I don't know, work revolution. I'm just throwing around like financial terms now. But Uranus and Taurus essentially shook our material foundations. And so Chiron entering Taurus right after Uranus leaves is the healing work that follows all of the disruption of Uranus and Taurus, right? Uranus and Taurus broke the old structures. Chiron is now asking, what is the wound underneath the structure that the disruption exposed? It's asking, what did you believe about money and worth and security that turned out to be more fragile than you realized, right? And what would it look like to heal that slowly over 7 years? Maybe not by rebuilding the same structure, but by really developing a relationship to your own worth that doesn't depend on money, that doesn't depend on external validation. People who were born between 1977 and 1983, when Chiron was last in Taurus, are now approaching their Chiron return, one of the most significant healing milestones of adult life. So if you were born in that window, the years from 2026 to 2033 are going to be very much yours in a very specific way. Like this is your Chiron return. You've heard of Saturn return. Here's Chiron return. Because there was a wound, right, that was written in your birth chart, and it's now being revisited with everything that you've learned since. It's not a crisis, but it is a completion. And I think that the return of Chiron to its natal position is really this invitation to finally heal at a depth that maybe wasn't possible the first time through. And so if you were born in that window, definitely pay attention. For everybody else, Chiron and Taurus is the slow, sustained work of building a relationship to your own worth that is intuitive, I think, rather than conditional, that doesn't shrink when your bank account shrinks, that doesn't expand only when someone tells you that you're doing well, that knows the difference between I'm having a hard time right now and I'm not enough. And I think the work takes 7 years because it's not surface work, right? It's the kind of work that has to happen in your body, in the Taurus rule, very physical reality of actually living your life one day at a time, choosing to treat yourself as though you really deserve to be here. And that can be really hard for some people, but that's really the invitation here, right? It's not dramatic. It's not performance, but it's super real and it takes time. And I think 7 years from now, the person who
or the people who take it seriously will have something that no amount of external validation can give or take away. I'm very excited to talk more about Chiron and Taurus. I'm going to definitely be talking a lot about it on my TikTok. I'm definitely going to do a piece about it, an essay about it on my Substack. I have a lot of ideas. So this was a shorter video than the Taurus season 2026 video just because there's less things happening in Gemini season. But let's zoom out really quickly. Let's kind of tie everything I just said and bring it back together. Gemini season 2026 is the season where the new era begins to feel real in your everyday life. In Taurus season, Uranus entered Gemini, but Taurus season itself kind of provided a kind of buffer, right? The earthy, sensory, slowdown energy of Taurus absorbed some of the shock, but Gemini season is removing that buffer. Now, the sun is in Gemini. Mercury is moving through its signs. The season ruler is being activated. Uranus is sitting right there at the beginning of the sign, getting activated by every fast-moving planet that it comes through. There is kind of nowhere to hide from Uranus and Gemini during Gemini season. You are living inside of it. What does that mean practically? It means that the information is coming in faster. The ideas are coming in faster. The connections and the conversations and the things that you didn't know yesterday that you know now today are coming faster. And I think it can be really exhilarating, but it can also be really destabilizing because your nervous system is just on go, go, go. Despite what Geminis might think, Gemini is not designed for this infinite input without processing anything. Right? So the people who thrive during Gemini season are not going to be the people who consume the most information, but the ones who have developed the capacity to discern what is worth their attention and what isn't. Gemini season is under this test, I think, right now because of Uranus, and you have to be the editor of your own mind. And I think the question this season is asking is, are you here? Not performing being here, not optimizing your presence for social media, but actually here in your body, in your relationships, in your specific and irreplaceable life, with your nervous system intact, with your values legible to you, with a relationship to your own worth that doesn't require constant external confirmation, right? That is what Gemini season 2026 is ultimately asking. I guess not can you keep up, which is what I said at the beginning. I know it can feel like that sometimes, but I think more of this question are you living on purpose, right? Are you living on purpose, or are you just living fast and doing things and talking to people? But is there any sort of real intentions and purpose to what you're doing? One of those questions, I know I just said a lot, but one of those questions will get you through the next 7 years of Uranus and Gemini, and one of them will not, and one of them will be very, very tiring. I know I've been talking about Uranus and Gemini a lot. I don't know if that's going to end. It's a really important transit. It's the most important transit that is happening all of 2026, all of maybe the 2024 to 2028 kind of era. So I'm kind of going to be connecting everything that happens in the next 6 months to Uranus and Gemini. But I'm also reading about Uranus right now. I'm reading this essay called Prometheus the Awakener. It's by Richard Tarnas, not sponsored. I don't even know if he's alive or not. But it's an essay on the archetypal meaning of the planet Uranus. And I'm currently in the middle of reading this book. It's very, very short. It's only about 130 pages. So yeah, it's really great so far. I'm gonna give you guys an update. I might write a little Substack essay about it. Who knows? But I'm really into Uranus right now and what it represents. And if any of you have read it, let me know. But with that being said, that is Gemini season 2026. Subscribe to my Substack for personalized horoscopes for Gemini season 2026. Subscribe to my YouTube. Hopefully you already are, since you're already here. Like this video. Comment on this video. Book a reading with me if you would like to. I need to get better with these outros, but that's all I have for you guys, and I will see you in Cancer season.